So the chapter that we're discussing today is inbound transportation, and these are the learning objectives for the chapter. So by the end of this chapter, this is what you would be knowing about, and then quickly moving on to the chapter. So if we think of or we consider as an organizational point of view, the materials normally flow from suppliers to the organization, which is inbound, and within the organization between the processes, which is our process flow, materials flow, then out of the organization to the next partner in the supply chain or the final customer if the organization is a retailer. Now, for all that to happen, there needs to be logistics or transportation. So, transportation basically is a link between customers, suppliers, factories, warehouses, and individual participants in a supply chain. So, these supply chains could be now local, they could be regional or international, and could involve a combination of these broad categories. Transportation, as we know, it does add value to the organization in terms of time and utility. So there are two types of utility here, which is your place utility and time utility. Place, obviously, making sure that the right product is available at the right place, and time utility when the right product is available at the right time. So it is important. Why are we doing this? Because we want to ensure that we suffice the main objective of supply chain management, which is customer satisfaction. Then, when we're talking about inbound transportation, there are many decisions that need to be made when managing inbound or outbound transportation, or and outbound transportation. So these could include like your mode of transport and what is the carrier that needs to be used. It needs to be determining transportation terms and prices. It needs to be aligning with both inbound and outbound flows to ensure that there is optimum utilization of equipments relating to transport. It is also about planning the supply routes, it's about classifying freight, it's determining the most economic quantities of consignments, it's about pooling the freight, auditing freight invoices, claiming if there are any damaged goods to ensure that you claim for those goods. Then again, within the organization, the outbound transportation is also about organizing in plant and interplant movement. Then, what is the importance of having managing the the transport in the supply chain? So, as we know, traditionally inbound transport decisions have been left to suppliers because they are the ones who transfer the freight and risk costs to the purchasing enterprise. But the importance for managing transport is about that it ensures that the products or the raw materials or semi-finished materials, they are received on time at the desired place and they are in good condition, making sure that large costs involved are managed efficiently. Transport costs, they constitute a significant part of purchasing cost of companies, so they need to be managed well. Then transportation, as it plays a key component and is very integrated in the supply chain, so it sort of coordinates the whole flow of supply chain as well. Then the transportation system itself becomes the warehouse, because what happens, the orders get consolidated and um, there are carriers that coordinate and make sure that the deliveries are made just in time. So JIT is just in time deliveries. Then a good transportation system, it enables that we have achieved competitive advantage, which is satisfying customers at lower cost. Now, managing inbound transportation. Now, there are some key leverage points, which are three here, which is volume per transaction in terms of buying larger amounts of product per transaction in order to get the best transportation rates, obviously buying in bulk. Then consolidation of carriers and movements in order to gain the best rate possible through negotiations with transportation suppliers. And then the third one is service requirements in terms of lead times and delivery requirements related to specific times and or expedited movements for shorter cycle times. So streamlining and controlling inbound transportation then becomes the most comprehensive way of removing cost from the incoming goods and also lowering the delivered price when we're trying to maintain the margin. So when this is basically the 6 steps that is involved to implement the transportation management system. First of all is collect current inbound transportation data. It's not just financial data, but also data that involves the state of or the model in itself that how do you say that represents the current state of supply chain network. Then identifying organizational objectives, where it involves determining how the inbound strategy relates to the organizational overall strategy. And the purpose of having this step is also to make sure that a firm understanding of the organization's plan before the tactical and operational components of inbound transportation management are implemented. Which means, for example, if the organization is committed to using local suppliers as part of corporate identity, it is more viable to implement a local inbound transportation plan than an import strategy. And the third step is identifying and establishing requirements for supplier compliance, which is the third step. It is to define clear and concise requirements for the pool of suppliers. And this should include the data elements that the suppliers should provide when they ship their products to the organization and the technology that will act as a communication medium between the organization and the supplier. So, technologies like your web based technology that allow suppliers to enter the exact stock keeping unit and quantity of shipments and provide full visibility of all inbound supplies all the way into production. Then the next step is develop a carrier management system. Now this step is most time consuming. So a professional way would be to produce a carrier base that can produce the desired cost of service metrics. Um, and once the carrier supply base is created, the suppliers and carriers can be managed on a daily basis. Then the next step is implementing inbound solutions. Now, the first task in implementing a solution is to obviously train the suppliers on these web based systems. Like companies have something called as TMS, which is your transportation management system. It is usually used for management of inbound transportation. So making sure that your suppliers are aware of it, they are trained, and implementation must start with top volume suppliers. And once the suppliers are familiar and comfortable with this TMS, then your daily shipments can be managed in the same way as outbound transportation, like you're including tenders that are loaded onto your electronic data, real time tracking and tracing, electronic tracking and tracing, and electronic freight payments. Then the last step in managing inbound transportation is establishing key performance indicators, KPIs, and metrics for continuous improvement. Now, this is a critical but a final step for developing a complete transportation management strategy. So, with a proper TMS, one can track daily reports. It can track compliance with inbound programs that are generated, and it also assists through the data. So with the data being thorough, we can expect saving and analyze on further additional savings that can be identified. Then moving to modes of transport. I don't think I have to read through this. They are quite simple to understand, and these are the various modes of transport that is being used. And obviously, intermodal transport is where a supply chain network is using more than one mode of transport. So there is a combination of different modes of transport depending on what the raw material where it's coming from, and then the finished product where it is being delivered to, exports, imports, what is it involved. So it depends accordingly, and hence intermodal transport. Transportation terms now, the cost of incoming transport is always regarded as part of the purchasing price of products, which is the total delivered cost. One of the common things that we come across now, transport terms, it affects the price of purchased goods. Transport terms does have an impact in terms of cost, in terms of risk, and in terms of legal implications. There is something called as Incoterms, which is international commercial terms. This is basically the terms that are used universally, your abbreviatedly or in short forms, and these terms can be used locally and internationally as well. So these are just some of the terminologies that are commonly used in transportation. Moving to internal transportation of materials, where internal transportation or movement of materials is often called as material handling. It does not add to value of the product, but it might be a major cost component, which is it is often more than 2% of the average value of stock. So the material handling cost, it can form up to 80% of indirect labor cost, and which is always more than 2% of your average value stock. And it is defined as I've given the definition. And yeah, what else we have in internal transportation of materials. They take place at the loading and unloading from vehicles, involves internal transportation. It involves movement to storage before processing or before assembly. It also involves movement of materials between workstations, movement to warehouse of finished goods, and also loading onto vehicles. So all of these form part of internal transportation, or we call it as these are internal transportation. Principles of internal movement. Now, the cost of internal movement should be limited by an efficient material flow, which means we have to have principles, procedures drawn in internal movement that will minimize the cost. So, transport should be eliminated, or transport distance should be shortened as much as possible. Material flow should not be interrupted until and unless it's really an emergency or necessary. Materials should keep moving at the time for which materials are located at various points that should be decreased. So, which is your principle of flow, making sure that they keep on moving, ensuring that easy routes are planned, and the backward movement of materials should be eliminated, which we call as the principle of layout. And then transport should take place in both directions. Thus, the movement of empty containers should be limited, which is principle of occupation. So, the movement happening and minimizing of empty containers or boxes. Economical quantities that should be transported or smaller containers should be used, making sure we utilize capacity to the most. And then gravity, or an alternative cheap and reliable source of power, should be used for movement of materials, which will help us in minimizing cost. So as you can see so far, the chapter here that we discuss now is focusing on inbound transportation, which is transportation of materials or items that are purchased from suppliers by any organization. There are some organizations, or most organizations, that focus only on lowering cost and improvising their service in outbound networks, because these are visible to the customers and the ones that bring in revenue. However, an effective supply chain strategy should also focus on all things in transportation, including inbound transportation, including internal transportation, which is our transportation between processes. So the supply chain management approach, specifically in this chapter, was about how it influences transportation decisions. Um, Traditionally, organizations have left inbound transportation to the discretion of suppliers, but in the modern supply chain management approach, All elements of transportation have become important for all the parties involved in the supply chain. Hence, it is important that we consider and value internal transportation equally as well. Okay, so that's about the chapter.